Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to learn a new process that finds the x values. We've talked about factoring. Okay, we factor and then you set them equal to 0. This is a different way. All of them are getting the same end result, which is the x-intercepts of your parabola. Okay, so on the test there's going to be specific directions. Solve for x with this method, solve for x with this method, solve for x with this method, and this one right here is called completing the square. Okay, so we're going to look at this one first by doing what's called the square root method. Now this is just getting us ready for completing the square. I'm not going to have this as one of your headings in the directions for the test, but this is getting us ready for that. So right over here on the left, we're going to factor this right here. So we're going to factor this. We've got 36 and 12. What two numbers work?
6.
Okay, so we've got 6 times 6 is 36, 6 plus 6 is 12. So if we wrote that, x plus 6 equals 6. Okay, now how could we rewrite this left-hand side and have it still be the same? What's another way to write? Yes, okay, so we've got x plus 6 squared is equal to 6. So those are the same two equations. Okay, now the reason it's called the square root method is because at this point, in order to get x by itself, what could we do to both sides? How could we get rid of this 2? Square root both sides. So over here on the left, the squared and the square root go away, so we're just left with x plus 6. And over here, remember, anytime you square root in an equal sign equation here, we always have plus or minus added to your answer. And then how do we get x by itself? Now we just subtract 6. So we've got x equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 6. Okay, and this would be your answer. So this is just a piece of what we do when we complete the square. So we're going to do the same thing on the next problem. So looking here, if we factor, what two numbers multiply to the top number and add to the bottom number? 9 and 9. So this would be x plus 9. Instead of writing it twice, I'm going to skip that part and just write squared is equal to 15. So again, at this point, what are we going to do? Square root both sides. So now we've got x plus 9 plus or minus root 15. And then we just subtract 9. Okay, now really there's two answers here. Would you agree with that? There's negative 9 plus root 15 and negative 9 minus root 15. Okay, so those are the two x-intercepts of your parabola. Now, the problems that I'm going to give you, the left-hand side isn't going to be something that can easily be factored yet. So that's what this whole completing the square process is going to entail, is getting the left side to look like that. And there's a very step-by-step, always follow these in logical order pattern to these problems. Okay, so we're going to be completing that square on the left-hand side. We ready? So on here, on the left are all of the instructions on how to do that. So we're going to put the work on the right-hand side to kind of follow along with those steps. All right, so this is our first problem right here. It says make sure that your first term has a coefficient of 1. If it doesn't have a 1 right here in the front, like it has a 3, then you would just divide all your terms by whatever that number is so that you get that first term to be a coefficient of 1 or no number in front. Okay, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, so our first step is to move C, what is C? Okay, the one all by itself, over to the other side. So this is now going to look like this, x squared plus 10x. We're going to leave a little space there, equals negative 9, because we subtracted 9 on both sides. Okay, that's step 1. So whatever the b value is, what's our b value? In this case, it's 10 right here. That's b. Right here it says to take that b value and take half of it and square it. Okay, so what's half of b? We're going to take 5 and square it, and we get 25. Okay, we're going to use that number. Okay, it says add it to both sides. Okay, so we're going to take x squared plus 10x plus 25 plus 25. Now on the left-hand side, we have something that can be factored. Okay, so you imagine your x right here. I'm not going to draw it. We have 25 on top and 10 on the bottom. What are the two numbers? 5 and 5 work. Okay, so this right here now turns into x plus 5 squared, or x plus 5 times x plus 5. And what does this simplify to be over here? How much? 16. Okay, so all we did was we factored this. If you want to write this over here, if this does help you, that's totally fine to do it at this point. We got 5 and 5. Now it turns into the problems we were just doing on the last page. What do we do now? Okay, right here, square root both sides and solve for x. So if we square root both sides, now we have x plus 5 equals plus or minus 4, because we're able to actually square root 16. We couldn't do that on the previous two problems. We subtract 5. We get x equals negative 5 plus or minus 4. Now, we can actually get two answers from this, so let's do that. First one, negative 5 plus 4 is negative 1. Negative 5 minus 4, negative 9. So if you can get two integer answers, please do so. Questions on that? We're going to try one more just to make sure we're good with these steps. Anyone still need this slide? A couple people? Okay. So here's an example where we don't have a 1 in the front, so what should we do? Okay, so we're going to divide everything by that first coefficient, that a value. So now it's x squared plus 8x plus 22. And now we'll follow the steps for completing the square. Step 1 is to move c to the other side. So we've got x squared, but we're going to leave a space in that spot. So we subtracted 22. Now how did we get this number that we were adding to both sides? So we'll take half of the 8, which is, okay, so we'll take half of 8 and get 4, and then we square that number. 16, that's the number we add to both sides. Now we're allowed to factor this. So if we factor that, what's it going to be? 4 and 4. Here's another hint. This number right in this spot will always be whatever half of your b value is. So when you cut this in half and square it, when you cut it in half, that's the number that's always going to get dropped right here. Okay? All right, so we've got x plus 4, quantity squared. What's over on the right-hand side when we put that together? Negative 6. Okay. Now what? Square root. Okay, so now we have x plus 4. What do we get here? We take the negative out as an I, and then we've got root 6. And the last step. Yep, just subtract 4. So we got negative 4 plus or minus I root 6. Same steps every single time. Any questions before we start on homework?